I'm going to type the reload command here, reload, and proceed with the reload. If I hit enter, it will default to whatever's between the brackets. So confirm, so I'll hit, and you can see here it's reloading the router, right? And decompressing the image. This is the iOS, right? So the iOS is a file stored in flash memory. So it decompresses the file, and you can see here the interface is briefly turned up, and then they are administratively put down once the configuration file is read, and the default state on the configuration file was to have the interfaces down. So if I hit enter, I'm automatically placed into user exec mode in the router. In other words, I'm essentially logged into the router, right, without even a password or anything. So we're going to change that right now so that we have to put in a password to just get to the user exec mode, and I'll show you how to do that. First we'll type in enable. That gets us to privileged mode, okay, and then we're going to type in config and conf, and I'll hit tab completion, and ter, hit tab, configure terminal, and this will take us into, hit enter, and that'll take us into global configuration. And now we're going to go to even a different configuration mode, a subset of global configuration mode. We're going to go to line configuration mode. So I'm going to say line, oops, lost my, there we go. I'm going to type in line space console 0, which means it's the first console port, or the only console port, so it's console 0. And I'll hit enter, and notice the command prompt has changed to config-line. So now I'm in line configuration mode, which is a subset of global config mode, right? So I'm in a special configuration mode right now. And in line console 0, I'm going to say password, and I'll type in Cisco. So that's going to make the password equal to Cisco. I'll hit enter, and then I'll type in login. Okay, you can see what commands are available to me here by typing in a question mark. You can see I can set the history, I can set logging. Notice login, enable, password, checking, right? So login right there. You can see there's other things that I can put on the line console 0, but what I'm going to do is I'm just going to type in login, and I'll hit enter, and now it's configured. So at this point I'll type exit, which takes me to global config mode. I'll type exit again, which takes me to privileged exec mode, and then I will type in copy, and instead of typing in running config space startup config to copy my configuration and save it to the startup configuration file, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do shorthand. I'll say copy run start, and this shorthand will work for copy running config. It's shorthand for running config startup config. Hit enter again to save it to that name, and now if I reload the router, it's going to decompress the image. I should be asked for a password before being placed into user exec mode. We'll see if it works. All right, so I'll hit enter, and sure enough, we've consoled into the router, but we're met with a password. So we have to put in a password before we can be logged into the router. So I'll type in the password Cisco, hit enter, and now I'm at the user exec prompt. Let's configure the VTY line for Telnet login or SSH login for the Cisco router this time. Okay, so I will type enable, and I'm into privileged exec mode, and now I'm going to need to go into global config mode, so configure terminal. Now I'm in global configuration mode, and once again we're going to need to go into a line configuration mode, but this time instead of line console 0, I'm going to type line space VTY for virtual terminal, and then 0 space 4, which will configure virtual terminal lines 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4, or 5 VTY lines for logging in. So I hit enter and I'm put into config line mode, or line configuration mode, and then I'll say password space Cisco. And you must have a password to be able to telnet into a Cisco router or switch. You have to have a password on the VTY line. So I'll say password Cisco, enter, and then log in and hit enter. And now the VTY is set up. So let's do this. We'll hit Control C, hit enter, and then I'm going to do a copy run tab, STA tab, copy running dash config to startup dash config, and I'll hit enter. And then let's take a look at our running configuration. I can just type show run for shorthand, and let's take a look. I'm hitting spacebar more, there's line console 0, password Cisco, and then line VTY 0 space 4, password Cisco login. So now both lines, line console, our console port, and also our virtual terminal port have been configured for login. Now for this to actually work, we're going to need to configure an interface so that we can telnet into the router. Right now we're consoled into the router, and we can't telnet into the router through a console port. We have to do it through an Ethernet port. So what I'll do to set this up is I'll get an end device, another PC, okay? I'll place it over here, for instance, and then I will get a crossover cable, because I'm going to go from the PC to the Ethernet port on the router. So crossover cable, and I'll click on the Ethernet port, then I'll take it to the router's Ethernet port. Okay, now on this PC what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to desktop configuration, and I'm going to set up quick IP addressing scheme and a subnet mask, and I'll make the router the default gateway. The router will be the default gateway 1.1, and I won't set up DNS, and I'll be 1.100. Okay, so that looks good. So the computer is set. Now the router has to be configured. So to do that, once again, we're going to do it through the command line of the router. So on the router, let's do this right through the command line CLI. So I'm in the router right now. I will do a configure terminal. That gets me into global config mode, and now I'm going to show you a new subset of global config. We're going to say enter and then hit tab for interface, then I'll say fast Ethernet. Notice fast Ethernet, and I'll say fast Ethernet 0. Okay, and notice it gives me, I put in interface fast Ethernet 0, and it gives me a caret here saying this is not the correct or invalid input. So something I've done there is incorrect. So what I'll do is do an up arrow, and I'll put a question mark here, and it wants 0 through 9. It wants the interface number of the Ethernet port that we're going to use. Well, let's take a look at what Ethernet we're connected to here. Right, there's 0, 0, and there's 1, 0. So I'm probably connected to 0, 0 right now. So what I'll do is I'll say fast Ethernet and interface fast Ethernet 0/0 and hit enter, and notice it takes me into config-IF or interface configuration mode. So now I'm in interface configuration mode, and I can type IP address 192.168.1.1 space the subnet mask. I'll take a I'll take a 255.255.255 .0 or /24 subnet mask, okay, default. All right, and then the last thing, after giving it the IP space address, the IP address, the subnet mask, I'll say no shutdown, and that should activate the interface, and right away we get a message output from the router saying interface fast Ethernet 00 change state to up, and now it's up. Okay, so what I can do now is do a Control C, hit enter, do a copy run start, which is short for copy running config space startup dash config, and hit enter. All right, and now the interface is up. So now we can now telnet from the PC into the router and have command line access, CLI access, but from a virtual terminal interface instead of a console interface. So let's test it out. We'll click on the PC here, and we'll go to a command prompt at the PC, and we'll say telnet into 192.168.1.1, and it asks instantly, it sees an open, and it asks for our password. We'll type in Cisco, hit enter, and we're in. You can see here that we can, from the command prompt, we now have a telnet session directly into the router. So now we have two different ways of connecting and administering the router, one through a console connection and the other one over the Ethernet, with telnet.